advantage in the Electoral College. You know that.
The Electoral College is a big advantage for Democrats, not for Republicans.
Like so many of the obviously false claims the president makes routinely, that one has no basis in fact. On the contrary, the truth is closer to the opposite. Over the last 3 decades in American politics, Republicans have only won the popular vote twice, first in 1988, again in 2004. But thanks to the Electoral College, Republicans keep getting elected president anyway. In Donald Trump's case, despite losing the popular vote by nearly 2.9 million votes, in a parallel universe, that would be a pretty resounding defeat. We know that it bothers the president because he repeatedly lied about it, claiming falsely he, quote, won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally that he made up. He even set up a whole commission, like a whole little plaything to try and reverse engineer some evidence for that claim. Remember that? Didn't work. Now, a growing number of Democratic presidential candidates support getting rid of the Electoral College altogether, and a group of Democratic senators are introducing a constitutional amendment to do just that. The senator behind that effort joins me now, Democrat Brian Schatz of Hawaii. Senator, it would be a big change. Obviously, this is something that's stood in constitutional structure since the ratification of the document itself. Why do you want to get rid of it?
Well, it's a basic principle. We ought to count all of the votes. All of the votes ought to count equally, and the person who gets the most votes ought to be president. It's the way we do it for mayor or congressman, for United States senator, for governor, for the state house, for the county council. The person who gets the most votes gets the office, and only with the office of the presidency is it sometimes the opposite.
The people, I guess, that argue on their side, right, there's a bunch of arguments they use. A lot of them are sort of really bad. But I guess the best version is that that people are concentrated in very few areas, and that if you got rid of Electoral College, just did popular vote, then they would just focus on areas where people are concentrated, and vast swaths of the country wouldn't get to see any candidates and wouldn't get any attention paid to them.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that. First of all, as a practical matter, in the waning weeks and even couple of months of every general election for president, by the end of it, you're only talking about 6, maybe 8, maybe 10 states that are in play. And presidential campaigns literally pull their financial resources, their human resources, the most valuable resource, which is the candidate's time and physical presence. They pull out of all those other states, so 40 or more states get totally ignored, the territories get totally ignored, and then 8 or 10 states get all of the attention. And so if we changed it to a national popular vote, everybody's vote counts the same, and you would be in no position to ignore anyone. The other part of this idea that a presidential candidate is going to park himself or herself in LA and Chicago and sort of try to run up the score there, that would be a really good way to lose. United States senators are also popularly elected. They all have states with some urban center and some rural neighborhoods, and everybody would be unwise to park themselves in the main city and never get out across the state. That is a recipe for losing an election. So it's just, I mean, look, they're uncomfortable with this position because they have to defend this idea that the person who gets the most votes is not necessarily going to be the president of the United States.
Well, there's an aspect to it too. You know, I've seen the coverage of this in the conservative media and on Trump TV, that it's a sort of takeover by some scary mob of Democrats. And I thought former Maine Governor Paul LePage sort of articulated the fear the most succinctly. Take a listen to what he had to say in February.
What would happen if they do what they say they're going to do? White people will not have anything to say. It's only going to be the minorities that would elect. It would be California, Texas, Florida.
What do you think of that?
I don't know how to respond to former Governor LePage, but I will tell you that if their main spokesperson against this kind of reform is former Governor LePage, I think we're in pretty terra firma. Listen. This is a very simple proposition. The majority of the American public are for this change. I don't underestimate the difficulty of amending the Constitution, but, you know, we used to appoint our United States senators based on what each individual legislature used to think, and we decided about 100 years ago to change that to popularly elect United States senators. Women weren't allowed to vote, and then we changed the United States Constitution. So I don't take this lightly. I understand amending the Constitution is a very serious matter, and certainly as it relates to changing the way we choose a president, it's a big deal. But I believe that once we make this change, it will be looked back upon as though it was obvious, it was intuitive, and it was a continued evolution of our democracy.
You know, there's an irony. You talk about running statewide. There's an irony, which is that the current jurisprudence of the Supreme Court, one person, one vote, would strike down anything that looked like the Electoral College if a state tried to do it for the way it ran elections, right? So if you try to elect a governor based on, county by county, how many counties they racked up, the Supreme Court would be like, that's nonsense and violates the spirit of the Constitution. Electoral College gets in under the wire, obviously, because it's written into the document. Final question for you. You've got a bit you do on Twitter that's pretty funny about, you'll talk about the news of the day and be like, this is crazy, but remember, the president's trying to take away protections for people with with pre-existing conditions. What do you make of the president deciding that the 2020 election should be a referendum on health care?
Well, listen, I'm pleased, and the reason that I'm pleased is not because the Republicans continue to try to take away our health care. They are doing that. They did it for 6 years when President Obama was president. They did it when they were in charge of both chambers of the legislative branch. They did it administratively, and now they're trying to do it through the courts in terms of invalidating the whole health care law. But what I loved about what happened over the last couple of days is they're admitting it, that they're not going to stop. They cannot help themselves. And despite the punishment that they received electorally in 2018, despite the fact that this is the most unpopular thing they could possibly do, this is their project. They are committed to it, and they're not going to let go of it. So I'm pleased at least they're admitting it and that we can litigate this over the next year and a half.
All right, Senator Brian Schatz White, thank you very much. Next, the president's utter disdain for